welcome back to my PMP training sessions. This session is going to be about defined scope. And this is where we define the deliverables that will be accomplished by the project. We put boundaries on what is going to be included and what's not going to be included. Many people miss the true meaning of scope. You got to look at two parts for scope. You have to consider the product deliverables and you have to look at the project objectives. The product deliverables, these are the descriptive items about the project. They have physical and functional features, measurements, dimensions, speed, looks, features. These are called product deliverables. And then you have the project objectives under which the sponsor is expecting you to deliver this one project by. So these could include quality, cost, schedule, requirements, conditions that are set on the project that you must comply with. Now, when it comes to conditions or objectives, we speak about SMART objectives. And the SMART objectives, the acronym SMART stands for specific, measurable, agreed upon, realistic, and time and cost limited. Now, every requirement, every piece of scope must be very specific. If it is not specific, then there's a very good chance that you will come into a dispute point with the sponsor or whoever you're delivering the project for because you didn't really specify what exactly must be delivered. If somebody said, I need lots of, or I need the engine to be like really fast, and they put that as a condition or requirement, that's not very specific. They need to give you a certain speed, rotations per minute, or something like that. So you need to have something that's clear and well-defined. Another thing is it has to be measurable. So if I give you something specific that says it must rotate at this many cycles per minute, then there's, that's probably something I can measure. And so whenever it's specific enough, it tends to be measurable. There's always some tool or some way of measuring what that feature or measuring that feature actually works. Agreed upon between you and the sponsor that this is in fact an objective on the project, that you both agree on it. So it can't be just in their minds or in your head. You got to both be talking and be on the same page when it comes to the project requirements. The requirements or the project scope must be realistic. So considering like time or money requirements, for example, they cannot give you something that you can't do within this time frame, or it is technically, for example, not possible to do. So it needs to be a realistic scope of work. Have the elephant fly. Unless there's some technology involved, that elephant's not going to fly. That's not realistic. And then everything that a project discusses typically has a time and scope requirement associated with it. So these are the schedule and budget requirements that will be put on the project. So again, that's what the SMART model is. You do need to know this for the exam. Okay, going to tools and techniques. The common one there is going to be expert judgment. Obviously, anyone who knows about the product is going to be beneficial. Anyone who knows about the industry, or the requirements of your sponsor. So if they know the sponsor well, then that's an expert. So you could always tap into expert judgment at any point in your project. The next item there is data or alternatives analysis. This is to see if you have different options available to you that can satisfy the requirements of the project. Mind you, you started from the project charter, you collected requirements from the stakeholders, and now you have a list of requirements and you're trying to figure what scope of work would satisfy those requirements. There's bound to be multiple options available to you, and you need to consider what is the best option that would satisfy what the sponsor is looking for. Whenever you have multiple options, a lot of times what you have to do is do multi-criteria decision making, and this is because some things are more valuable to the organization than others. So we tend to create a decision matrix, and it has, for example, one criteria here, another criteria, another criteria, another criteria, and every one of these is going to have a percentage weightage, and then total will be 100% at the bottom. And we tend to score the options available versus these criteria to see which one scores the highest. You've probably done it for evaluating vendors. You probably used it to select a job or to hire an employee. You've used it to figure out where you want to move. We use that a lot, and there are tools that you can use. You just need to search up, multi-criteria decision making on the internet, and you'll probably see a lot of these tables with the percentages, and then you can score them. You can score each criteria on how much it meets your needs. So that's decision making there. Interpersonal and team skills, that's going to be required because you're probably going to have to hold a lot of meetings with your sponsor or with the team or with industry experts to try to figure out, maybe vendors, to try to figure out what solution would work for you. Product analysis, this is the interesting one, the last one there. If the end result is a product, you may want to look at what goes into the product. And for every piece of the product, you analyze it and you figure what scope would be required to satisfy it. Let me see if I can show you this on my whiteboard. All right, so if we were looking at the product, and let's say the product was an airplane, right? I'm an artist, it looks like. I don't really know what goes in the back, but let's assume that's your, this is your plane, flying nice. If I forgot something on the plane, I'm not an artist, okay? So what we do here is we have to analyze every piece of it. So you may want to take it in sections. Where's the color here? That's okay. All right, so we want to take it in sections here, and you say, for example, the cockpit, right? What is the scope for the cockpit, considering all the requirements that I've collected? Then you could look at the engines, right? And then you could look at the fuel system, and then you can look at the entertainment system, and then you can go and look at for example, the cargo area or storage. You could look at the outer shell, and then you can look at design. So basically what you're doing is you're analyzing every piece. You're breaking down the product essentially to several pieces here, and you have to analyze what's the scope that goes into putting together the cockpit, like the dashboard, the seating, and so on. What about the engines? What about the fuel system? And so you analyze every piece of this, and this is called product breakdown analysis. And you may have to do that when we're talking about a product. All right, so once you've analyzed the product and you use all these techniques, the outcome that you're going to get is a scope statement. The scope statement details what is required on the project and what is not required, what is excluded from the project. Now, you might be saying, well, isn't it by default agreed that whatever we don't put in the scope statement is not included? Well, the reality is your sponsor or whoever you're doing the project for, they tend to have different expectations in their head. And because they have these expectations and you know that they might be expecting that, you need to clearly tell them that that's excluded. And you have to tell them it's excluded, not going to be included in your project. So that's what they're stating here. It's best to be clear on what you're including and what you're not including. All right? So that's the project exclusion that you see there. But the main things that go into a scope statement would be the scope description, expanding on what you got from the charter, being very clear on what can be expected as an output from this one project, and clearly naming what the deliverables are. And you can bulletize these things. And I'll show you an example in a little bit. Also, in addition, you may want to put the acceptance criteria, and this is like the handover criteria. So if you were doing, if you were working on a building, then at the end of the construction, you can expect that the receiver or the sponsor's engineer is going to come check that one building, test all the faucets, test the electricity, the doors, elevator, whatever it is. They're going to check it to make sure that it meets their criteria. If it's an IT system, maybe you have to run this for a week. Whatever the criteria is that they give you on the other side before they can take it. Sometimes they require, as part of the acceptance criteria, some additional deliverables. So you'll find that the acceptance criteria and deliverables might be in a way related. They might require documentation, they might require training for 50 people, and these are considered deliverables and part of the acceptance criteria. That's what a scope statement would look like. And I just wanted to show you this so you have a better sense for what scope statement's about. It has scope description, deliverables, acceptance criteria, exclusions, contrasts, and assumptions. I'll see if I can include these as a link inside the below the video. If possible, I'll put it in there, but no guarantees at this point. So that's where we are at the moment. We have the scope statement as the final outcome. Now, once you complete the scope statement, typically a few documents would need to be updated, such as the requirements documentation. By putting together the scope, some things could be uncovered, some additional requirements may be figured out, or maybe some requirements could be taken out. Stakeholder register, that may need to be updated because as part of you getting the final design or final scope for your project, you may have to interact with additional new stakeholders, and so that you have to update in there. Any assumptions that have been made, I know you put them on the scope statement, you should update your assumption log, the one that you have prepared previously. And this takes us to the end of defined scope process. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.